My name is Larry, and you are listening to the Tolkien Podcast. Since talking about Balrogs in a previous episode, they've been on my mind. The other thing that's been on my mind is the audience, and I think it's hard to know. You're speaking into the void. You're speaking into a microphone, literally, but into a void figuratively. You don't know if anyone's going to like what you have to say. You don't know if anyone's going to respond. You don't know what people are going to think, if they're going to turn it on or listen. But it turns out, with no promotion whatsoever, this podcast is being listened to. And I think I'll get better at doing it, but hopefully the audience will grow. But thinking about that audience, I think there's some more things to cover. There's some more things to say about Balrogs. And it was to the point that I almost redid the whole Balrog episode, but I decided instead to do kind of a continuation of that discussion. And I thought about the audience, like, what do they want to hear? I said early on in that podcast that I thought I was getting in the weeds a lot, and that's really a danger here because there's such deep and detailed lore surrounding all of Tolkien's Middle-earth that you can get into the weeds. You can get deep into the weeds, in fact, deep into the forest, and deep underground and in deep water. So I thought carefully about what was and what was not said about Balrogs, and I think there's a couple of things we need to talk about further. One of those is the history of Middle-earth, which in Tolkien, Middle-earth is part of the Earth, and the Earth is called Arda. So the history of Arda, really, but that might not make sense to some people. So for the audience purposes, we're going to talk about the world of Middle-earth, of J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle-earth, and its history really briefly but clearly. And I don't want to use a bunch of dates, and I don't want to use a bunch of names. So I'm going to, in a broad, big picture, conversational way, talk about that today. I'm going to talk about, we did that a little, but I just don't feel like it was clear and easy. So I want to make it clear and easy so that it's anybody at home, even if they haven't read these things, can have a feeling of that. And then how Balrogs fit in that. And then I really wanted to talk about some cinema. If you have a copy of The Lord of the Rings handy, you may wish to grab it and look. If you have the maps memorized, you may wish to grab it and look. If you have the Atlas of Middle-earth, you certainly should grab it and study. But if you look at the maps in The Lord of the Rings, in the back of my copy of Fellowship of the Ring, where it happens to be in your edition, you'll notice that it starts with the west of Middle-earth. It shows a big picture map, and then it has several maps that are kind of close-ups of different versions of that. Yeah, so those are there. You'll notice, though, that even in the most general map, the first and the biggest map, that it's not showing the world. It's simply showing a land, a continent, if you will. So just to be clear, that's Middle-earth, a continent, and Arda is the world, Earth. Also, in case you aren't aware, many of you will be, many of you might not be, but Middle-earth is our world. It just like the Norse word Midgard, it's the same word, Middle-earth, the mid of the guard, the Middle-earth, Earth. So all of this, of course, is prehistory, but Middle-earth's a continent and Arda's the world. So we're going to talk about the history of Middle-earth, but it's part of a bigger world. Again, this is not a scholarly approach. I am not naming very many names. In fact, as few as possible. And I'm not naming dates. I'm just giving a brief timeline to help understand Balrogs a little better, but also just general info. Before Arda, when in the void, if you will, there were the Ainur. The Ainur that's what we would, in a different mythology, we would equate them to gods. They were intelligences or spirits, and again, I'm skipping names. I'm not going detailed, but these Ainur, the creator led them in a great song that took place before time began, really. And they sang the song. In that song, I am naming this name, there was Melkor, who created discord, but he was a powerful, great music agent of his own. The creator was able to wrap this discord back into the main tune, but Melkor had shown his nature from the beginning, but he was brilliant, and there were many of the Ainur who followed him in his discordant music. In the short version, this song was the creation of the material universe, and specifically Arda. So these groups, these Ainur, entered Arda and divided into two groups. Again, more names, and I'm almost entirely done with names. But the Valar, of which there were 14, and the Maiar, of which there was an unnamed number, and many. We don't know how many, and we don't know most of their names, but we know a few. So the Valar, all named, not named here, and the Maiar entered Arda, or entered the world. And wouldn't you know it, that same Melkor was on hand to cause trouble. Arda at that time did not resemble the Middle-earth and the maps that we eventually know in The Lord of the Rings. It was quite different. In fact, there was not even a sun and moon. 2 giant pillars held 2 giant lamps that stood in the far north and the far south of the world to give light to it. They were the work of the Valar. Well, Melkor destroyed these lamps. This, of course, was an attack and an act of war, and the breaking of the pillars and the lamps broke Middle-earth. And the Valar separated their blessed realm. I guess we're going to have to name that one Valinor. They separated Valinor from the rest of what became Middle-earth. In the Blessed Realm, maybe what we would think of as paradise, the Valinor created 2 trees instead to give off light, gold and silver. During this time, several important things happened. Again, I'm going so fast, but the dwarves were created and then put to sleep. Eagles and Ents were created in Middle-earth. And in a surprise twist that apparently no one saw coming, Melkor rose again and killed the 2 trees with the help of a giant spider gets named Ungoliant. So, in fact, she devours the light. In fact, she devours everything she can. And we can't linger, but she's pretty interesting. The legend, the rumor is that she may have eventually devoured herself. With the darkening of Valinor, everything changes, and we begin the first age of Middle-earth, breezing through history at breakneck pace. The elves are awakened. There is what's called the Battle of Powers, which again features Melkor, troublemaker that he is, and the chaining of Melkor. The Silmarils are created, which are the greatest jewels, I guess, ever. And men also eventually are awoken. And then there's the final defeat of Melkor, now called Morgoth. And, I said we wouldn't use names, but that guy has 2 names, and it's important to know why. Melkor, who brought many of the Maya with him, his name meant he who arises in might, but it was changed, and the elves called him Morgoth, which means the dark enemy. Just to make sure nobody is confused, he is the father baddie, the daddy baddie of Sauron, who we know from Lord of the Rings. Sauron was one of those who followed him, one of the dark spirits or ill-intentioned Ainur who followed Melkor. In that final battle, the Valar returned to help elves and men who were a little bit powerless before Morgoth. And ultimately he is defeated, but once again the land is broken and changed. Everything goes pretty badly for all these creations of the Valar. But Morgoth has finally run out of chances. And so this time he is cast out of the realm. He's sort of placed in darkness, in outer darkness, if you will. That sort of kicks off the second age of Middle-earth. And in that age, the ancestors of Aragorn, of Elisar, same guy, many names, settle on an island called Númenor. That is shown often in the Rings of Power show, in some form or another, in some truncated time or compressed time or another. The 2 kingdoms of humans are set up in Arnor and Gondor. We know kind of both of those in the tales of the Third Age, the War of the Ring. We hear about or experience or deal with both of those kingdoms. Some other things happen that kind of lay the groundwork for the War of the Ring that we all know so well, and those include the forging of the Rings of Power. Sauron now acting in Morgoth's place. Sauron has also corrupted kings and men, so the ring wraiths show up, the Nazgul are created. And eventually that island, that Númenorian island, which in many ways represented the highest and the best of men in Middle-earth, is thrown down. And from that remnant, those set up the 2 kingdoms of men in Middle-earth. So from Númenor to the north and south, Arnor and Gondor. And that leads us right to what we see very clearly in the cinema in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings in the first few minutes, when we see Elrond hanging with humans and they're fighting a giant Sauron and his big badass mace. But the ring is cut from Sauron's finger, and if it had been cast into the fire, it would have destroyed his essence. But he lives, and of course is able to hang out and regroup and become something else. So I think that covers pretty well. No, actually, that's not true. It doesn't cover pretty well the history of Arda, or Middle-earth, but it covers in a very, very basic way the history. So hopefully that's useful to people when we can't do that every time. We can't recover this whole history every time. So that's sort of a starting point. And thus it is, though, with that in mind, the Valar and the Maiar, thus it is that Gandalf, one of the Maya, is leading some of the free peoples of Middle-earth after the fall of Sauron, after the One Ring's been lost. There's Gandalf trying to be a leader, trying to fight for freedom, trying to help. He's with the remnant of the kingdom of Arnor, Aragorn. He's with a steward, not someone in line to be the king of Gondor, but the people who have taken over to lead Gondor, the stewards of Gondor. He's with their top guy as well, Boromir, obviously. So Boromir, Aragorn, Gandalf there, Legolas, just a forest elf, Gimli representing dwarves, and then these hobbit creatures who didn't even make the history that we just pointed out, right? They were not even prominent enough to make the history, except that somehow Gollum found that One Ring after it was lost. The very most important object in Middle-earth that if Sauron were able to get back, he would be able to restore his power in a time when the kingdoms of men and elves and dwarves were vastly diminished. So Sauron, with that power being restored, he put his essence in that ring. He would be powerful and terrible, and conceivably would take over Middle-earth. The question then, which we don't know the answer to, would the Valar return and help, or would they send more Maiar like Gandalf to fight? So there's Gandalf, one of 5 wizards, who's opposing Saruman, who is in league with Sauron, and Gandalf chooses to go into the mines of Moria, and there he meets one of the other great creatures in all of creation, another Maya, but one who followed Melkor. So now we're going to talk movies. I'm going to talk a little bit internet lore, and we're now firmly out of Middle-earth, and we're in the real world. We're in Earth, not fantasy Middle-earth. In 1999, rumors sprang up that Peter Jackson, the guy who had last directed The Frighteners, was now going to put together the Lord of the Rings movies. In 1969, J.R.R. Tolkien, did I put one too many R's in there? J.R.R. Tolkien sold the film and other certain rights to his works, The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, to get money to help pay hospital bills. That he did get a fair amount of money. He wasn't given a discount rate, but in retrospect, after all that has been done in the last 40 years with those rights, I guess it's 50 years now. It was sold for a song. It was sold at the time to United Artists, which was a film studio at the time. Then in 1976, the Salzans Company bought the rights to help produce the Lord of the Rings film by animator Ralph Bakshi. Maybe the big problem with that film is it didn't cover the whole story, and I spent half my childhood trying to find part 2 in every video store that existed, thinking surely someone must have made the film, but alas, it wasn't made and it wasn't completed. But I love what they did, and I think it's really watchable still. I've had occasion to talk to Mr. Bakshi, and to be honest, I found him a bit of a grump, but he was a great artist, and he did a lot for Middle-earth. He did certain visual things that Peter Jackson recognized were beautifully done, including the Nazgul. And so there's a lot of Bakshi is impressive. You can find him online or find his social media channels, and you can even buy cells of the film sometimes. I just have realized I just mispronounced his name wrong. It's not Ralph Bakshi. It's Ralph Bakshi. His website, you're welcome to visit and read more about him from him. It's Bakshi Studios, BAKSHISTUDIO, BakshiStudio.com. And it has news, and it talks about his films and his art and about him. And I said he was a grump, but he really was a great animation artist. Furthermore, I think I need to be completely fair to him. He wasn't happy with me. We did an interview. It was fairly long. It was at a really challenging, really difficult time in my life. And I was volunteering for a website at the time. And the interview was so long, and I thought it might not do him complete credit. But I'm sure he's peeved with me for never having run that interview anywhere. And so, I'd say he's a little grumpy, but listen, he was a great artist, and he probably at least had, I'm sure he doesn't even remember me, but he had a little beef with me, which is totally fair, and I don't want to be unfair to him. But I did check out his website while I was doing this, and you can absolutely go there and buy stills from his Lord of the Rings animated film, including a really cool Nazgul on a black horse. Anyhow, it was the Saul Zaentz company that then subleased or let the rights go to New Line Cinema in 2001. There's a whole lot of drama in how that happened, but maybe this isn't the time or place. But those 3 films were made through that license that Saul Zaentz held. Interesting to note, Saul Zaentz produced 10 films, and 3 of those 10 films won Academy Awards for Best Picture, including One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, The English Patient, and Amadeus. That's a pretty amazing legacy. I believe that gentleman has passed. So in 2022, so just a few years ago, the company was kind of in the process of being done with Tolkien and Middle-earth, and Warner Brothers was very interested in making more films and more content. And there was a change at the Tolkien estate. Christopher stepped aside as the caretaker of all things Tolkien. And so in 2022, the Saul Zaentz company sold those rights. I guess there were 30 companies who were interested in acquiring those rights, but they were sold for $395 million to what is now called Middle-earth Enterprises, a group I've never talked to anyone from or don't know how or who, but they're a subsidiary of a Swedish video game company called the Embracer Company. So literally a video game company now holds all the licensing rights to make further books or movies or merchandise or video games of Middle-earth. Well, not of all Middle-earth, but of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. It's worth noting that the Silmarillion rights are very much still held by the Tolkien estate. When I was on the Hobbit set for a while, I know, there's lots of expansion of the pure Hobbit story from the book. There were always lawyers there checking to make sure that anything that was going to be on screen was either original or it was in The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit in some way. For example, if a name appears in The Lord of the Rings, then it could be used. But if it does not, and it only appears in the Silmarillion, it cannot be used. And I'm quite certain that would still apply to the Amazon show, although things may work slightly differently depending on the Tolkien's estate willingness to, perhaps let a name or a map or an area go. In some of the Lord of the Rings of Power publicity, there were some maps that popped up in promotional material that definitely did use names that were not in the Lord of the Rings. In the 1990s, the internet, of course, had taken off, but in the late 1990s, a strange phenomenon happened, and that is movie fan sites. There are now many copies of movie fan sites that are definitely corporate movie sites, but in the late 90s, there were a few that were notable. I'm going to name names. One of those was called Ain't It Cool News, which was fans writing about movies and sneak peeks and information leaks. Obviously, information leaks can be very manipulative, and they can be leaked by certain people who want a certain result. But, if you're running a fan website on your own and you get these leaks, it's big business. So you do that. TheOneRing.net popped up. I have a lot to say about that, but I volunteered there for, 15 years. I did a lot of things, and always owe a huge debt to those guys and people that were my friends, my close friends for a long, long time. So one of the things that is real that people now maybe don't realize is that New Line Cinema was best known for its horror films when it acquired those rights to Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings films. And it was New Line Cinema that supported the vision of making 3 films all at once. Sort of. They sort of were made all at once. They were finished one at a time, and there was lots of shooting between. But that's the way the legend goes. And so this bold move by Freddy Krueger's company resulted in those movies. But I have a collection of magazines. I'm surely not getting them out of storage, but all of them saying, could this be the end of New Line Cinema? Movie studio takes a huge gamble on Lord of the Rings. Movie studio bets the house. The idea was that if this Fellowship of the Ring, the first of these 3 films, didn't do well at the box office, the films were absolutely doomed, and to a degree that the studio itself would go away. So the executives of the studio too, where it was like, make or break. Like, this will either work or my career's over. So these fan sites, Ain't It Cool News and The One Ring, were invited to go to a special screening of a preview of these films. And, one of probably the single biggest place you could show a film or show a tease for a film or have your film premiere is the Cannes Film Festival. Cannes, along with Venice and Berlin, is one of the big 3 film festivals in Europe. And then along with Sundance, which happens, in my backyard, and Toronto, it's one of the big 5 film festivals in all the world. And I think it's number 1, but I've never been to it, so I don't know. Anyway, The Lord of the Rings, a fantasy film by a horror movie studio, decided to do a preview of the film at Cannes. Not the whole thing, but to show 20 minutes. And they invited these fan sites, not only invited them, but flew them to Cannes, flew somebody from The One Ring and Harry from Ain't It Cool News. I don't even know if Harry's alive. I haven't heard of that guy for years and years and years. And they made a big deal of it. Now, the thing the Lord of the Rings really had going for it that everyone would recognize now, but maybe didn't at the time, is that Weta Workshop, Richard Taylor, who grew up in parallel with Peter Jackson in that nation's previously almost unheard of film industry, was really great at practical effects. He had the right people doing designs. He had nerds who appropriately loved J.R.R. Tolkien and Lord of the Rings. They also had Alan Lee and John Howe, 2 of the great Tolkien artists, invited to contribute. And by the way, there were other Tolkien artists invited who elected not to go there to spend years in New Zealand. And feel fine about that. So at Cannes, they not only showed the screening, but they set up a lot of props and sets and things from Middle-earth at pretty big expense, actually, right? But New Line Cinema knew it wasn't time to play it safe. It was time to bet the house. They knew that they needed a hit. And so the 20 minutes they showed feature a Balrog, and that's what I want to talk about. Fan anticipation was at a fever pitch, and the signs, meaning the publicity shots and the spy reports and the leaked information, all pointed to great success. And, success for nerds, not box office success. The general public had to love these films too, but it looked like the nerds were maybe going to be happy and were pretty excited. So, and I say nerds affectionately, please don't take that as any kind of disparagement. So, off The One Ring goes to Cannes, off Ain't It Cool News goes to Cannes. And then along with a whole bunch of people from the film world, important people who are at Cannes, they show 20 minutes of footage. So The Weight of the World on Its Shoulders, a 20-minute sizzle reel, was displayed and played in Cannes. You can watch it. I've watched it, but it starts with Ian McKellen in that Hobbit cart, and Peter Jackson, not Frodo, Peter Jackson on the cart, And then McKellen says, dressed as Gandalf, and McKellen says, "Greetings from New Zealand." He introduces Peter Jackson, and Peter Jackson thanks New Line for giving them the opportunity to be immersed in Middle-earth for 15 months and sort of sets the stage for the footage that he's going to show. He explains that there's 2,500 people who have been involved and that they're still filming from October 11th, 1999, while Cannes was in May of 2001. The showcase opens in Hobbiton, a beautifully created outdoor set. We'll talk a lot about that at some point. It highlights Ian McKellen and Ian Holm and definitely shows how the size differences work as they interact with two different film plates and two different sets, but perfectly synced so that the illusion of size difference is perfect. And that's really important to show to Cannes and the fan sites, but to everyone, the world, really. They introduce the hobbits, they introduce the Nazgul, they have Ian McKellen explain the peril. It's a lot of chops from there to get further into the story. Little snippets, they give a feeling and give you a good idea of who the characters are. All the music's temporary, of course. I don't have the full score in, and so that's missing from the movie, from the clips that we'll later see in the movie. They found really good temp score, but the magnificence of the score by Howard Shore is something else entirely. Minus some of the conflict, we are taken into the mines of Moria in that clip, and the music, I do believe, is from Howard Shore at that point. It may not be synced to the movie way, but Jackson or his team or the producers or all of those people thought dropping us in the mines of Moria and showing us the grandeur of it would give us a feeling for how grand Middle Earth is and important enough, big enough, inspiring enough for the people in Cannes. I think it has a quote from Gimli that isn't in the movies, and he says, "It is a marvel," and he needs to communicate that to the audience, which he did, but I don't think it made the final cut of the film. There's some shot-for-shot differences, but in large part, this is much of what we see from the moment the Fellowship walks into the tomb, into Durin's tomb area, and they find the book, from Pippin throwing things down the well and causing noise, and then the orcs attacking. All of that's more or less intact. I don't think it's shot for shot perfect for final cut, but it's definitely recognizable. It would feel the same, and I do believe even the music's some of the same. One thing I don't want to be is somebody who only praises Peter Jackson, nor do I want to be somebody who only criticizes Peter Jackson or only criticizes The Hobbit and whatever. I don't want to be that. But what I do want to be is honest. And this part of what I have to say about Peter Jackson is a lot of praise. To be full disclosure, during Hobbit filming, I was in New Zealand, and I stopped by the production with permission, of course, and on the shore or the bridge of the Pelorus River, where they film like the barrel scene, I met Pete during lunchtime, and he invited me to go to set and spend 5 weeks on the Hobbit set, which I did. I have a lot to say about that, obviously. So, I had other experiences in New Zealand and followed Pete around for a day and did a lot of stuff. So I don't want to hide the fact that I'm, some would say, perhaps prone to overpraise or give too much praise, but I have criticisms too. And I hope he never hears any of this. I'm sure he won't. I don't think that's remote or impossible, but I'll tell you what, I'll stick up for this footage. What Peter Jackson does, what makes him a genius director, he shoots action very, very well. You always know what's going on, even with multiple characters. It's very clear. It's very planned. You know the story. You can follow the action. But other directors do that too. That's not unique to Pete Jackson. But what elevates his action is it never is just action for action's sake. It's never just things happening. It's character driven. His action's always character driven. For example, the cave troll in the sequence that we're talking about, he's not just a monster. He's much, much more than that. He's intelligent. He's thinking. He's smelling. He has motives. We feel him. He has emotions. We might even pity him when he makes that sound when Legolas shoots an arrow in his brain through his mouth. There's all kinds of real creative character driven action, which is much, much different than just action. And for me, I'm not sure anyone does that better than Peter Jackson does. Now, there's other parts of the film that maybe I'll criticize. Maybe I don't like a script decision, or maybe I don't like a decision to exclude something or to truncate something. There's other things I could be critical about, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the canned footage. And I think probably, and I know this sounds hyperbolic and it sounds like I'm, going crazy a little bit, but I'm not sure there's a better 20-minute action sequence in cinema. It's as good as anything. I didn't say it was the best, but it's as good as anything. It's fantastic filmmaking, and it elevates this whole film. So if you remember, we're first introduced to orcs and fighting some orcs, some big uglies, and amazing makeup job on these practical effects, really good. But then the stakes are elevated. We see Legolas shoot him from behind, standing on him in the brain, and it doesn't end this cave troll, but the cave troll staggers around and breaks him, takes the mightiest warriors out. Like, he's fierce, and we see his intelligence, and he's after Frodo somehow. He knows that Frodo might be the prize. That might be hard to explain. I would say it's just ring instinct in the movie world. That doesn't mean we're not talking book world, remember, movie world. But the Fellowship working together, each with their own fighting style, which is another thing I love. Again, character-driven action. Gimli does not fight like Legolas, who does not fight like Aragorn, who does not fight like Boromir, who does not fight like Sam, who uses frying pans. Perhaps silly. If I was going to criticize any part of this segment, I thought the hobbits were a little overpowered. It seemed a little silly to me that a frying pan would take out these orcs. But whatever. They're goblins, and they've been in the dark for a long time, and they're maybe just caught unprepared. So this footage continues, and finally we defeat the cave troll, and then with all the foreshadowing that's come about who Gandalf, the fire and shadow that he might see in Moria, we see it. We start to see the red coming down the hallway, and it, instead of being frantic and action paced, it goes slow. And Peter Jackson lets Ian McKellen's face tell us everything we need to know. It's so good. And it does a little nerd fan service, too. We hear Ian McKellen say, "A demon of the ancient world." Just so good. Even Legolas, who we have a very good idea can jump on cave trolls' backs and walk on snow and do miraculous things. Pete gives us a real pregnant look at Legolas's face, that we even see that he's afraid. It's a little tiny touch, but it's a storytelling, right? It's action driven by character. So we get all the sequences of the chase and the bridge and the falling stairs and the threat of the demon and the shadow, and Ian McKellen's like, "This foe is beyond any of you," and he tells Aragorn to get to the bridge, and we have all these storytelling devices, and then we don't get all of Ian McKellen's performance, but we get that line, "You shall not pass," which is, again, it's just great. It's great cinema. It's told with such drama, such character-driven action, and even with all those characters, by the way, all those members of the Fellowship, each of them, we understand their motives, their fears, we understand what's happening. The scene ends, I said Ian's, and the scene completes, finishes with "You shall not pass," and in McKellen it goes dark, and then it brings up mountains of New Zealand, which look perfect for Middle Earth, and it says December 2001 on the screen. And then we're led to through other scenes from the Two Towers and the Return of the King, really high drama, little brief things. And they make sure to show the faces of all the stars, Liv Tyler and Bernard Hill, and not so much the dwarves, they're pretty unknown, and not too much Legolas, but Viggo Mortensen for sure. They showcase all these high emotion moments. Eowyn is certainly, Miranda Otto is certainly featured too, with some great shots. So they even go all the way to Sam, to Sean Astin, saying, "If I can't carry it, but I can carry you." I'm paraphrasing. And then they show Frodo, or I should say they show Elijah Wood as Frodo inside the volcano, and he has a ring, and he's clearly beaten. And beaten down, not defeated, beaten. Anyway, they show all the drama in there, and he says, "I will not destroy it," or some such thing. High drama. They're selling this movie. They got to make sure they're not holding anything back. They're giving you a tease at least over and over and over. I think the final words of the trilogy are Elijah Wood saying, the ring is mine. And as he puts it on, it flashes up the Lord of the Rings.